There was a moment, not long ago, when I stood by the window of my apartment, looking out at the city skyline. The sun was setting, the sky a wash of orange and purple, and everything outside seemed to shimmer with possibility. On the surface, my life looked perfectly aligned. My job was secure, my days filled with familiar routines. Friends reached out with invitations I politely accepted. Yet inside, I felt a slow, relentless emptiness creeping in, a quiet confusion that whispered, "Something's missing." It wasn't a loud ache or an obvious sadness, but a subtle fog settling deep below. I wondered, why, when everything appears so right, do I still feel so lost? This is the part that caught me off guard, that ironic space where the world, as others see it, tells a story of success, while inside, I'm wrestling with a strange disconnect. It's like standing in the middle of a crowded room, surrounded by noise and activity, but feeling utterly alone. I remember jotting down a question late one night. Why can't I just enjoy what I have? Why is there always this nagging sense that I'm not enough, or that something crucial is slipping through my fingers? The words felt raw, yet strangely familiar, as if they belonged to a lingering conversation I'd been avoiding. In the quiet hours, it became harder to ignore how my mind seemed to reel uncontrollably, shifting from one worry to the next, rehearsing endless what-ifs that never led anywhere productive. My thoughts jumped ahead to future scenarios, sometimes thrilling in their possibility, other times dark, steeped in fear. But the present moment? It felt like sand slipping through my fingers, impossible to hold on to. The harder I tried to grasp it, the more elusive it became. This wasn't just distraction or stress. It was a persistent sensation that I was slipping out of sync with myself. I also noticed how busy I kept myself, refusing to pause, always moving from task to task. It was as if filling every second with activity would drown out the silence inside. I thought, maybe if I achieved just one more thing, or became a bit better, or controlled the chaos around me, I'd find peace. But peace never came dressed in accomplishment. In fact, chasing it through external markers only deepened that sense of emptiness. It was a cycle, stubborn and invisible, tightening around me. One evening, I sat across from a close friend, someone who had watched me wrestle with these feelings for months. She said, "I see you out there, doing it all. But I also see you here." She tapped her chest, disconnected. Her words felt like a mix of comfort and challenge. I wasn't crazy or lazy. I wasn't the only one feeling this way. Yet, how do you explain to others what feels like a silent, persistent dissonance inside? The kind of emptiness that looks like anxiety, but doesn't scream in a voice everyone recognizes? I began to realize that this feeling wasn't about the things I had or hadn't done. It wasn't about the people who showed up or the plans I made. It was something quieter, a battle happening beneath the surface that few talked about. This invisible tension was confusing me because it lived somewhere between accomplishment and contentment, between ambition and stillness. It was like my mind had decided to keep running, never letting me rest long enough to catch my breath or remind me who I was beyond all the noise. The more I sat with this experience, the more questions poured in. Why do I resist the present? Why does my mind jump ahead to all the what-ifs instead of welcoming what's already here? Why do I mistake busyness for meaning or control for security? Each question felt like an invitation, but also a mirror showing the cracks I usually tried to ignore. So, I started to listen closely, not to find quick fixes or surface answers, but to understand the language my mind was speaking. I wanted to hear the whispers beneath the anxiety, the feelings masked behind the routines, and the stories I was telling myself about who I was supposed to be versus who I really felt inside. This journey wasn't about changing my life overnight or erasing the challenges around me. It was about reconnecting with something deeply authentic that had been overshadowed for far too long. As I stand here now, sharing this with you, I invite you to consider your own life in the same way. Maybe your external world feels put together, but inside, there's a quiet voice asking why you're not fully present. Maybe there's a kind of fog or disorientation that you've been carrying silently, a soft, confusing emptiness that doesn't make sense against the backdrop of your achievements or relationships. You're not alone. What we're about to explore is not a promise of overnight clarity or easy fixes, but a shared journey, a way to gently unravel the threads of anxiety that keep us feeling disconnected and lost. This is an invitation to lean in, to hear the subtle messages beneath the noise, and to start a quiet awakening inside ourselves. Because sometimes, the most profound transformations come not from changing the world around us first, but from beginning to rebuild the sense of direction rooted deep within. I'm ready to walk this path with you, not with pat answers, but with honesty, empathy, and hope. Let's see what we uncover together. There was an afternoon when I caught myself staring blankly at a bustling park, where children laughed and chased after frisbees, and couples strolled hand in hand beneath the canopy of green. To anyone watching, it was an ordinary, joyful scene filled with vitality. Yet inside me, a restless unease unfurled like a tangled vine. I realized I had become a spectator in my own life, present in body but absent in spirit. This revelation hit me sharply, underscoring a deep internal fragmentation I had overlooked. I began examining this discord more carefully. It was as if my thoughts operated on autopilot, endlessly mapping out plans or rehashing old conversations while my senses dulled to immediate experience. It dawned on me that anxiety had turned my perception into a fragmented cinema, playing scenes non-sequentially and out of sync. Moments that should have brought simple pleasure, feeling the sun's warmth, hearing a bird's call, were swallowed by preoccupations with outcomes and judgments I couldn't escape. One memory stands out vividly. I was at a familiar coffee shop, notebook open, supposed to be brainstorming ideas. Instead, I was trapped in an internal argument, oscillating between fear of failure and the pressure to prove my worth. Suddenly, a stranger at the next table laughed heartily at something on their phone. That unguarded joy struck me with a pang of envy and sorrow. Why was it so difficult to savor such uncomplicated happiness? Why did my mind chase elusive goals while dismissing what was right in front of me? This dissonance extended into my relationships as well. I noticed how my presence was often divided, physically near, mentally distant. During conversations, my focus wavered, my responses mechanical, missing the nuanced currents of connection. It was as though I inhabited parallel worlds, one where I moved through social scripts flawlessly, another where I longed for genuine intimacy, but didn't know how to bridge the gap. Loneliness crept in quietly, even when surrounded by warmth. Confronted with this, I challenged myself to trace these patterns back to their roots. Anxiety, I realized, doesn't only breed fear, it also distorts how we interpret our internal signals. Instead of hearing my body's subtle cues, like fatigue or curiosity, I misread them as threats or inadequacies. This fundamental confusion made me question my decisions incessantly, fracturing my sense of self into fragments that rarely aligned cohesively. There was a turning point when I decided to slow down, not forcibly, but with curiosity. On a crisp morning, I sat on a park bench without distractions, allowing my senses to gather fragments of sound, scent, and touch. At first, the silence was uncomfortable, buzzing with the echoes of unspoken worries. But gradually, the cacophony softened. I noticed the pattern of bird calls, the gentle rustle of leaves, the warmth of sunlight on my skin. These elements wove together, creating an unexpected harmony. It was a fleeting peace, yes, but enough to ignite a flicker of hope. Another facet I uncovered was how anxiety had seduced me into mistaking busyness for progress. My calendar brimmed with meetings, deadlines, and social commitments, a frantic dance to fill the void I couldn't identify. Yet this momentum often blurred the boundary between active participation and mere survival. I began asking, did my actions nourish me or merely distract me? Was I steering my life, or reacting to an internal restlessness that demanded constant stimuli? In one revealing exchange with a close friend, I confided how I felt directionless despite outward signs of success. They listened quietly, then offered an insight that struck my core. Maybe you're chasing the wrong goal, not something external, but the feeling of being home within yourself. Those words settled deep. The idea that true direction might emerge not from achievement, but from belonging to our own mind and heart, expanded my perspective profoundly. I also observed how this complex anxiety veiled self-compassion. I judged myself harshly for perceived shortcomings, fueling a cycle of criticism that dimmed my inner light. When I paused and considered the weight of these relentless standards, I realized I was wielding a sword meant to provoke growth, yet it often wounded my confidence instead. It became evident that healing required gentleness, a willingness to sit with discomfort without condemnation. Now, consider how this applies when you face those moments of disquiet, when the world spins rapidly and you're caught in a loop of doubt and pressure. Recognize the invitation to shift from external validation to internal attunement, to listen deeply to subtle feelings that whisper truths beyond surface anxieties. Imagine extending yourself the kindness you readily offer to others, but rarely grant your own restless mind. These insights revealed that the sensation of disorientation connected intimately to fragmented attention and identity. The journey ahead called for reconnecting disparate parts of ourselves, to build bridges where isolation had risen. Rather than surrendering to overwhelm, I started imagining my inner landscape as a library with scattered, half-opened books, each waiting patiently to be understood and harmonized. Opening these chapters slowly promised a path toward coherence and renewed clarity. I won't pretend it was immediate or simple. The process required patience, curiosity, and a willingness to embrace vulnerability without rushing past it. Yet even small moments of authentic presence became anchors amidst the storm, enabling me to reclaim my sense of orientation within the swirling currents of life. This transformation wasn't about erasing anxiety's presence, but learning to navigate its influence with wisdom and grace. I remember a night when restlessness clawed at me with such intensity that lying still became impossible. My thoughts sprinted down countless unfamiliar corridors, each twisting into another "what if" that amplified an already overwhelming sense of imbalance. It struck me that this inner turmoil wasn't just about an overactive mind. It resembled a seasoned illusionist, skillfully distracting me from recognizing the present realities with tricks of uncertainty and doubt. Like a magician pulling veils of smoke, anxiety conjured illusions of deficiencies where none truly existed. In that moment, I began to understand how my relentless focus on future possibilities had created an invisible prison. Imagining endless eventualities replaced genuine engagement with current experiences. Instead of savoring a conversation or absorbing a simple sunset, my consciousness was hijacked by a carousel of hypothetical events that demanded my attention but delivered no true solace. It became clear this ceaseless forecasting was exhausting my capacity to be fully alive in what was actually unfolding around me. I found myself recalling a conversation with an elderly neighbor who, despite years marked by hardship, exuded a grounded peace I admired. When I asked how he maintained calm in chaos, he smiled gently and said, "Son, my mind used to dart everywhere. Past, future, worries, and it jumbled my heart. One day, I learned to tether it to what's happening right now. That's where life breathes." His words echoed not just as advice, but as a revelation that presence is a muscle-needing deliberate exercise, not just an automatic state. Encountering this shifted focus forced me to confront a habit I hadn't recognized until then, confusing mere activity with meaningful progress. I spent hours filling my schedule, mistakenly believing that constant motion equated to purpose. I recalled countless moments when I berated myself for not measuring up, drowning in anticipatory fears. What if, I wondered aloud, the path toward reconnection lies through self-forgiveness and gentleness rather than relentless self-correction and judgment? This perspective opened doors into a softer relationship with my inner landscape. Rather than striving to silence anxious thoughts, I experimented with welcoming them without resistance, acknowledging their presence as though greeting an uneasy guest rather than an enemy. In doing so, anxiety's grip loosened subtly. Its intensity diminished when faced with acceptance, as if deflated by kindly recognition rather than fueled by avoidance and fear. One night, while journaling, I wrote down a metaphor that resonated deeply. Anxiety is like static on a radio, interrupting the clear broadcast of my inner voice. When I tune to acceptance, the static fades, revealing the melodies I had forgotten existed. That image helped me understand that reconnecting to myself involved both discerning what echoed from anxious noise and creating space for genuine expression. If you think about moments when your thoughts spiral into endless loops or when efforts to fix feelings lead only to exhaustion, Consider that perhaps the solution isn't in more activity or control, but in a mindful invitation to observe those waves without immediately diving into them. This shift isn't instant, but invites a profound transformation over time, like learning to dance with uncertainty rather than wrestling against it. Through these experiences, I've come to realize that reclaiming a sense of internal direction requires a willingness to sit with discomfort, to confront illusions spun by anxiety, and to cultivate a patient presence that listens attentively to subtle signals often drowned out by frantic noise. Taking these steps, I began to experience moments where confusion gave way to clarity and restlessness softened into calm resolve. Though the journey remains ongoing, each fragment of awareness propels me toward a more anchored, authentic way of being. On a cloudy afternoon, I found myself wandering aimlessly through a labyrinthine bookstore, surrounded by towers of forgotten knowledge and stories waiting to be rediscovered. The scent of aged paper and leather-bound covers filled the air, inviting exploration. Yet inside me, a restless tension persisted, a fierce yearning for something intangible that even these countless tomes failed to satisfy. It struck me then how this yearning was different from mere curiosity. It was a silent unraveling of clarity, a search for inner alignment amid conflicting currents. I recalled a conversation with an old mentor who once compared our inner tensions to a ship adrift without a compass. "You can row hard all day," he said, "but without direction, you simply exhaust yourself." That metaphor took root, revealing an essential truth. Ceaseless effort devoid of an internal bearing breeds exhaustion masquerading as progress. I recognized how many of my own movements had been nothing more than drifting, propelled by anxiety's unrelenting impetus, yet lacking intentionality. My mind raced with realizations. There was an unsettling habit I had cultivated, treating thoughts and emotions like guests to be controlled or evicted, not companions to be welcomed and understood. Each fleeting feeling became a puzzle piece tossed aside if it didn't fit the neat narrative I desired. This rejection intensified fragmentation within me and elevated confusion into an art form. Accepting emotions as fluid messengers rather than fixed adversaries was a mountain I hadn't yet climbed. A few weeks later, I encountered a community art exhibit featuring abstract paintings layered with chaotic yet delicate brushstrokes. One canvas stood out, an explosion of vibrant colors colliding, intertwining without clear form but alive with tension and emotion. Its creator explained that he sought to capture the experience of internal unrest, acknowledging that harmony often emerges through embracing discord, not erasing it. That insight pierced my defenses, suggesting the possibility of transformation through integration instead of resistance. In attempts to reclaim my own inner landscape, I experimented with writing letters to aspects of myself that had been marginalized or silenced by anxiety's demands. One such letter was addressed to my restless mind, a voice often loud, insistent, and unforgiving. I penned, "I see you pushing, pulling, trying to protect me from fate's unknowns. But your methods exhaust me. Will you try, if just for a moment, to rest beside me instead of racing ahead?" This simple gesture opened a pathway for dialogue I hadn't realized was blocked by judgment and impatience. The following morning, I awoke with a tempered energy, as if a portion of my internal storm had steadied. Though silent, a subtle shift had taken place, an easing of tension allowing brief glimpses of spaciousness within my thoughts. This respite wasn't dramatic but profound because it revealed that transformation need not erupt in grand climaxes. Sometimes it grows quietly through small acts of acceptance and curiosity. I also noticed how my relationships mirrored this inner work. Where I had once reacted defensively to perceived slights or misunderstandings, I now found myself more inclined to pause and seek understanding, both of others and myself. This shift diminished the frequent sense of alienation and fortified connection with genuine presence. Moments of shared vulnerability transformed from risks into bonds, weaving a safety net beneath me when uncertainties surged. There was a powerful evening when, after weeks of internal exploration, a close friend turned to me and said, "I sense you're becoming your own home, no longer building walls to keep things out, but opening doors to invite in all parts of yourself." Her words crystallized my journey's essence, self-reconciliation over self-denial, wholeness over fragmentation. Now, imagine facing times when life's currents threaten to sweep you off course, leaving your inner compass spinning without fix. What if, instead of battling this confusion fiercely, you chose to surrender to a spacious inquiry, listening to every part of yourself without haste or judgment? This approach doesn't demand immediate answers, but grants permission to inhabit complexity authentically. In my own experience, these moments became opportunities for compassionate insight instead of despair. I came to understand that clarity isn't the absence of chaos, but the ability to witness it without losing myself. Each layer I embraced revealed hidden reservoirs of resilience and wisdom, waiting patiently to guide me forward. Although the path remains winding and uncertain, every step toward integration has shed light on new possibilities for meaning and belonging. That evening, the city hummed around me, streets alive with flickering lights and distant conversations echoing against brick walls. I walked without destination, entangled in a restless swirl of thoughts that felt less like reflections and more like fragments scattering in every direction. Suddenly, a jarring realization hit me. I had been mistaking busyness for clarity, confusing noise for insight. The frenetic pace of my existence had become a protective maze, shielding me from confronting an unsettling void I hardly dared to name. In an impulsive moment, I ducked into a small jazz club tucked between towering buildings. The room was dim, suffused with smoky warmth, and the soft strains of a saxophone floated through the air. I settled at the bar, surrendering to the music's unpredictable cadence. Each note felt drawn from raw emotion, sometimes smooth, sometimes sharp, always alive. Watching the musician's lips press against the instrument, feeling the afternoon's tension release, I recognized a metaphor for my own condition. I, too, had been playing a rehearsed tune, locked in a pattern without improvisation, ignoring my own rhythms. The saxophonist's occasional slips and spontaneous riffs reminded me how life demands openness to the unexpected. In the grip of anxiety, I had craved rigid control, erecting fences around uncertainty. Yet real authenticity reveals itself when we loosen our grip, allowing vulnerability to color our expressions. It struck me that the space between practiced bars, the hesitation, the breaths, were not empty gaps, but fertile ground for transformation. Those pauses, silent yet potent, were invitations to reconnect with parts of myself silenced through relentless striving. Later, as the shadows grew longer, I met an artist painting a mural nearby. Her bold strokes crafted images that seemed to pulse with life, faces neither perfect nor fixed, expressing stories caught mid-motion. When I expressed admiration, she shared how she embraced imperfections, seeing them as gateways into deeper truths rather than flaws to conceal. Her perspective challenged my own pursuit of perfection, showing me how surrendering to the messy, unpolished hues of existence can lead to profound discovery. I realized that the chase for rightness had obscured the richness of experiencing what truly is, forcing me into a constant, exhausting masquerade. While reflecting on these encounters, I recalled countless times when my mind replayed imagined failures or feedback loops of not enough. These mental echoes had shaded my vision with tinted glasses, blurring my ability to make decisions rooted in genuine desire instead of conditioned expectations. I began to question the origins of this relentless pressure. Was it truly mine, or had it been passed down, embedded in invisible scripts I never chose? A quiet rebellion stirred. Perhaps the path forward demanded not more doing, but a restructuring of my relationship with myself. One morning, I paused atop a hill overlooking the awakening cityscape. The sky stretched vast, scattered with wisps of cloud tinted rose by dawn's light. I noticed how shadows retreated not through frantic chasing, but by simply allowing the sun's radiance to fill space. This natural metaphor unfolded as a lesson. Progress can arise through receptivity and gentleness, qualities often sidelined in favor of forceful striving. I resolved to practice this new stance, embracing patience with my evolving pace rather than berating perceived delays. On a related note, during a meeting with a mentor whose wisdom carried years of quiet observation, she remarked, Have you allowed your compass to recalibrate in stillness, or are you relying on outdated maps to navigate? Her question sparked a vivid image of a traveler trudging through unfamiliar terrain, clinging to charts that no longer matched landscapes. I saw how frequently I had depended on inherited narratives and external validation, neglecting to attend to the subtler signals guiding my authentic desires. This epiphany opened space to reevaluate my assumptions. During the following week, I committed to brief, daily rituals that nurtured this awakening. Sitting barefoot on the earth, savoring unhurried meals, allowing moments for silence even amid chaos. These small acts became threads weaving a more resilient fabric of self-attunement. I noticed an incremental but distinct liberation from compulsive planning, a softening of the urge to fix every ambiguity instantly. It felt as though a door was cracking open, inviting me to inhabit a life not dictated by anxious urgency, but grounded in attentive presence. Next, I confronted how fear of stagnation had propelled me to equate progress exclusively with visible achievement. Yet when I examined stillness closely, it revealed unexpected potency, a place where ideas gestate, emotions mature, and clarity quietly emerges. Much like a seed immersed in soil, growth often demands patience and hidden processes beyond immediate perception. This reframing challenged fundamental assumptions, inviting a gentler, more sustainable approach to transformation. If you now reflect on moments when relentless doing clouds your focus or when your mind fixates on controlling outcomes, consider this. Genuine navigation requires attuning to shifting internal currents, not just steering with brute force. Progress emerges less from conquering external terrain and more from cultivating fluid, adaptive responses that honor complexity. This realization felt like shedding an old skin, arduous yet necessary to reveal the pulse of life pulsating beneath. Through these shifts, I began to glimpse the contours of a new relationship with myself, one that welcomes imperfection, cultivates curiosity over certainty, and prizes the subtle art of surrender. Though uncertainties continue to surface, I now perceive them not as threats to stability, but as invitations to align more deeply with what is real and alive inside. It is in this embrace I've discovered that the journey toward authentic direction truly begins. When twilight settled over the city, I found myself wandering through a forgotten section of an old garden, where wild vines tangled with cracked statues and blooms struggled through shadows. The air carried a delicate scent, earthy, tangled with damp leaves, and a strange sense of suspended time. In that moment, the outside world faded, and an unexpected clarity began to emerge. It wasn't tied to the usual markers of achievement or progress, but to a deeper realization. The disorientation gnawing at me was less about absence and more about a missing connection to my own rhythm. I recall the sensation of the cold stone beneath my fingertips as I traced familiar grooves worn smooth by years of weather. This tactile contact grounded me when my thoughts drifted hopelessly to future uncertainties, which always seemed just out of reach, yet suffocatingly close. Since my anxiety worked as an invisible puppeteer, yanking my attention back and forth across imagined scenarios, reconnecting through the tangible, touch, scent, sounds, became a lifeline. This awakened a vital understanding. When the mind fractures, the body can offer a path back to coherence. On that walk, a phrase surfaced, whispered between the rustling leaves. Movement without awareness scatters energy. It felt like a coded message about how my day-to-day busyness, while overwhelming, lacked a meaningful flow directing it inward. I remembered a conversation with an ancient craftsman who had hammered and carved wood with infinite patience. He told me, "Your hands know the story your mind refuses to tell. Slow down, listen to their voice." I realized that my own constant pacing signaled resistance to this dialogue, a refusal to acknowledge the wisdom residing in subtle rhythms of breath and pulse. Later, I sat beside a small fountain, its clear water rippling softly as droplets fell in endless patterns. Watching the concentric circles expand and fade, I felt my scattered thoughts align with this natural cycle. Each wave dissolved into calm only to give way for the next, never stagnant, always transforming. Suddenly, my internal struggle appeared less like an enemy and more like an evolving dance. Anxiety's grip loosened when perceived as a rhythm to learn from instead of a barrier to escape. In the days that followed, I experimented with intentional pauses embedded within routines usually dictated by frenzy. Even when surrounded by noise or pressure, I tried anchoring awareness onto micro-moments. The coolness of water washing my hands, the grain of a wooden chair beneath me, or the simple act of noticing my breath entering and leaving. These tiny anchors became a form of rebellion against the mind's race, gently redirecting energy toward presence. Surprisingly, the sensation of being lost began unraveling through these quiet reclaimings. An illuminating encounter took place during a weekend retreat, where we practiced mindful walking. Rather than covering ground quickly, we were encouraged to move with deliberate slowness, observing sensations from heels touching soft earth to shifting balance. Hearing the crunch of leaves, my thoughts softened, urgency melted into curiosity. I overheard a fellow participant whisper, "I've been sprinting through life, ignoring my feet. Now, I feel a connection I never knew I missed." Her words echoed my own awakening, reinforcing how rejoining the body's geography can restore fractured orientation. Conversations with friends deepened this exploration. When I shared confusion about my internal compass, one said, "Imagine your inner self as a garden. Anxiety is like invasive weeds that choke growth, but gentle tending with care and patience can bring life back." Their metaphor sparked a visual blueprint for healing. It required not forceful uprooting, but attentive nurturing. This shifted my approach from battling feelings to tending cultivation, reinforcing trust in the slow but inevitable emergence of clarity. One evening, as rain softly tapped the window pane, I reflected on how often I dismissed subtle signals, the slight tightening in my chest or the creeping sense of fatigue, as obstacles rather than essential guides. Learning to honor these whispers transformed my relationship with discomfort, turning it into a compass rather than a warning light. Now, instead of attempting to silence unease, I invited it politely as a guest, asking what messages it carried. When you face moments of overwhelming uncertainty, consider looking for these physical anchors. Touch your own skin, listen intently to ambient sounds, or trace shapes around you. Allow bodily sensations to root your awareness when the mind's chatter threatens to overwhelm. This practice acts like a whispered dialogue between your inner world and the external environment, offering a map through disorientation. I promise you, within these seemingly insignificant gestures lies profound potential to unravel confusion and reclaim groundedness. In embracing this path, I learned that true orientation emerges from a tapestry of subtle engagements, not forceful strides, but delicate threads of embodied awareness weaving themselves into a coherent whole. This discovery opened doors to an inner sanctuary, where anxiety's tangled shadows no longer dictated my direction, and a quieter, more resilient guidance surfaced to light the way forward. Reflecting on this journey so far, I sense a subtle shift stirring within me, an undercurrent weaving disparate threads into a tapestry neither chaotic nor rigid, but alive and textured. It isn't an arrival at some distant summit, but an awakening of pathways previously obscured by the fog of relentless seeking. I glimpse how the seemingly conflicting forces of restlessness and stillness, control and surrender, fragmentation and wholeness coalesce in a delicate dance, inviting me to move with a new kind of grace. As I sit quietly now, the echoes of earlier insights linger like a melody refracted through shifting light. Each note contributes to a symphony of understanding that resonates quietly inside, not demanding immediate articulation, but urging deep receptivity. The internal landscape I navigated, the swirl of uncertainties, the craving for clarity, the silent tensions, are no longer isolated islands but facets of a shared terrain. It feels as though these elements form the very ground on which a fresh sense of direction can soon crystallize. It's strange how the mind, in its habitual patterns, often fractures experience into fragments, carving boundaries that separate presence from absence, action from meaning. Yet as I soften into this process, boundaries begin to blur, not into formlessness, but into an emergent continuity that allows gaps to be as meaningful as what fills them. This space between thoughts, emotions, and sensations becomes fertile soil, alive with the potential of something quietly transformative waiting to take root. At moments, I catch myself navigating the tension between surrendering and striving, as if balancing on a taut wire stretched across an unseen chasm. Each step demands attentiveness, trust, and the willingness to engage with uncertainty without collapsing into despair or scattering into frantic movement. In this precarious equilibrium, I start recognizing the subtle intelligence nurtured by patience and openness, a wisdom that doesn't hurry but unfolds with a patient rhythm attuned more to emergence than to conquest. The sensations I'm awakening to possess an elusive quality, intangible yet undeniable, gentle but persistent, like the slow spreading of dawn's light across a shadowed valley. This dawning resides not in the loud proclamations of transformed life, but in small gestures, the quiet return of curiosity, the softening of inner resistance, the tentative reconnection with a self that had long been fragmented by distraction and expectation. It's the subtle reclaiming of an intimate presence that had been overlooked amid the noisy battleground of anxiety. On this path, conversations with myself oscillate between moments of kindness and confrontation. I find an inner witness shifting its gaze from critique to compassionate inquiry, allowing wounds to emerge with dignity rather than demanding swift fixes or repression. This witness listens deeply to the whispers buried beneath the clamor, granting permission for complexity to coexist with hope. In doing so, it sketches the contours of a sanctuary, not enclosed or static, but fluid and capable of holding contradictions and uncertainties without fracturing. Sometimes, in the quiet interludes of reflection, I imagine a forest after a storm. Branches reach recklessly in varied directions, leaves scattered across damp earth. Yet amid the apparent disorder, new shoots push upward, and roots deepen their embrace of the soil's shifting texture. The storm doesn't erase the forest but reshapes it, allowing a renewal that contains scars like stories. This imagery offers a metaphor for our internal landscapes, sometimes torn by tumult, yet harboring the seeds of regeneration that only turbulence can unlock. There is a growing recognition that the direction I seek need not originate from external signposts, but from an attunement to rhythms that pulse quietly beneath awareness. It becomes clear that this inner compass is not a fixed point, but a dynamic unfolding, one that requires a willingness to engage with both clarity and ambiguity. This engagement asks me to loosen the grip on expectations of certainty and to inhabit space that might feel unfamiliar or even unsettling at first. I catch myself wondering how often our deepest misalignments arise from trying to fit our lived experience into predefined templates rather than listening to the truths emerging uniquely from within. In that pondering, I feel an invitation to lean toward an expansive listening, a trust in the inherent wisdom residing inside us, even when obscured by noise or fear. To cultivate a presence that can bear discomfort without dissolving into despair, that can welcome questions without rushing towards premature answers. As this inner dialogue unfolds, a gentle trust accrues, a conviction not of problem solved, but of a journey embraced, with all its complexity and grace. The weight of fragmented narratives begins to lift slightly, revealing that the intricate entanglement of emotions and thoughts, often perceived as burdens, can transform into a weave of meaning that shapes a new sense of self. This self is neither static nor prescribed, but breathed into existence through patient attention and courageous openness. In these quiet spaces, anticipation settles in, not the restless craving for completion, but a poised readiness to recognize when the conditions are ripe for emergence. Like the earth nurturing a seed beneath layers of dark soil, waiting for the moment when roots can push through with quiet strength. I realize that what has developed so far, this melding of insight, presence, and vulnerability, is the fertile ground from which something profoundly authentic can soon begin to bloom. As dusk deepened around me, a quiet settled inside that was unlike any I had known before, a stillness not born of surrender, but of understanding. I realized the subtle truth I'd been chasing all along. The ache I carried was not a sign of failure or lack, but an invitation to arrive into a deeper presence with myself. It wasn't about fixing a broken part or rushing toward resolution, but learning to hold the complexity of my inner world with steady hands and an open heart. In the soft cloak of twilight, I recalled how often my mind raced ahead to imagined destinations, skipping over the terrain beneath my feet. I thought about all the moments lost to chasing what-ifs and maybes, the countless hours poured into sculpting a future that always seemed just out of reach. But in embracing patience, I began to discover a kind of grace in inhabiting uncertainty, a space where questions no longer felt like threats, but doorways. To dwell there was to graduate from mere existence into an unfolding story shaped by presence instead of pressure. Walking slowly along a quiet path, I became aware of each breath, the rustle of leaves catching a breeze, the faint pulse of life all around me. Those fragments, once overshadowed by anxiety's din, now composed a rich symphony of awareness that anchored me in the here and now. I understood that the void I'd sensed was not emptiness at all, but a cavern waiting to echo my authentic voice. The fisher's anxiety had carved weren't wounds to hide, but secret passages inviting me home. I came to realize that seeking peace outside, in achievements, approval, or control, was a detour away from the true sanctuary residing within. That realization loosened the grip of perfectionism and judgment, allowing space for compassion to take root. Like a gardener tending delicate seedlings through changing seasons, I learned that nurturing myself required gentleness, courage, and above all, reverence for processes unfolding in their own time. There were evenings when shadows lengthened, and the old restlessness whispered its familiar call, tempting me back into the spiral of doubt. In those moments, I reminded myself of something a wise voice once shared. Resilience isn't about immunity to struggle. It's the willingness to lean into discomfort with curiosity and kindness. The openness to feel fully, even when it hurts, became a wellspring of strength, subtle but unshakable. I won't pretend the journey has smoothed every rough edge or erased every question. The path remains textured with mystery and challenge, yet I welcome this terrain with an increasing sense of trust. The inner compass I feared was missing reveals itself through acts of presence, acceptance, and quiet bravery. With each step, the dissonant chords within me begin harmonizing into a melody uniquely mine, marked by authenticity rather than avoidance. This isn't an endpoint, but an ongoing communion with life's unfolding rhythms. Our inner landscapes echo the seasons, sometimes bursting with growth, at times retreating into reflection, each phase essential, each moment sacred. I'm learning to honor this ebb and flow, embracing both brightness and shadow as vital threads woven into the fabric of self. If you are reading these words and sensing a similar unrest, know you are not alone. The silent confusion you carry need not be a burden but a beacon, calling you toward a more profound connection with your own being. Trust the process of becoming with patience and openness, celebrating every small awakening. Within the seeming chaos, a quiet clarity awaits, one that will gently light the way forward when you are ready to follow. And so, I keep walking, breath steady, senses alive, inviting whatever arises with courage and compassion. Toward the horizon where possibility blends with presence, I move, not chasing fulfillment as a distant prize, but embracing the journey itself as a sacred unfolding of the self. In this revelation, I find the soft, resilient foundation on which to stand and the quiet strength to rise again.